Well, hello, and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, and Beau Higgins. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. But most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that all veterans deserve a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, you can earn, and you can build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. My primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, welcome to another edition of the MilVet Podcast. I am your host, Beau Higgins, and I have the pleasure today to be joined by Brian O'Connor. For those that may not be familiar with the MilVet is an executive platform that is primarily built for veterans that are looking to get into the private equity and venture capital space. For those that are not familiar with the MilVet, I encourage you to check out themilvet.org and sign up for our newsletter. Listen to our podcast, which hopefully you're listening to right now to learn more about it, and learn more about some of the guests we have on here. We bring on a wide variety of different guests to talk about their transition stories. And today, Brian, great to have you on here, and would love to hear. Let's start off with what are you doing today, Brian? Why do we have you on here today? And what are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Beau. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Great community that you built here at the Military Veteran. So excited to be here and kind of talk about my transition story, what I'm working on. So today, I'm the CEO and founder of Darksaber Labs. Darksaber Labs is a SIGINT electronic warfare cyber AI company, right? So we're trying to push out AI to the edge to warfighters to where it's needed most. And I think it's probably, from my experience, one of like the most underappreciated or underutilized portions of like the tech stack is out of the edge. So that's my mission, keeping people safe as it was when I was in the military, which I'm continuing to do so in the civilian or private sector.
No, I love it. I'm personally fired up about it. I was a SIGINT officer in the Marine Corps. Back in the 90s, SIGINT was very different. We literally were like breaking codes by hand when I went to cryptologic division officer school. I mean, honestly, it was like doing codes and ciphers. And I'm sure it's changed dramatically from what it is today. So I'm sure the technology is much more advanced. But I like to go with my guests and kind of start from the beginning of how'd you, what was the impetus for you to join the military? Why was the Navy your thing? And how did and we'll get to why cryptology became your thing even more so. But how'd the Navy get on your radar as a kid or as a teenager? What was the reason for your decision to even join the Navy in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm originally from New York, like an hour north of the city, right by West Point. So like the Army guys listening probably know where that is. I grew up in a place called Goshen. So when 9/11 happened, all the firefighters and police really don't live in the city. They live in the areas outside the city, the counties outside the city. That's in Long Island and upstate New York. So the direct experience and impact of some of the guys who the buildings actually fell on at that time. The firefighters, policemen. The movie The World Trade Center was actually about somebody in my hometown of Goshen, Port Authority policeman that had the towers drop on him. He had that kind of like iconic scene in that movie where there's a Marine kind of going around that had just signed back up to go and help out down at Ground Zero. So I heard a lot of my stories from the survivors, and like some of the last survivors pulled from the wreckage, from firefighters, from Port Authority, from police. So that kind of like motivated me in a real way because my community was affected. There were several firefighters that perished in my community. Dennis Devlin to be one of them, right? Rescue one, kind of guys going in, running up the stairs to the top, trying to save people right up to the last minute. So, that heroic actions that took place on that day really just stuck with me, right? As a young man, I think I was in 8th grade and, right before high school. So, I was in high school during the invasion of Iraq and I ended up going to college in upstate New York playing baseball. And then my plan right after college was to join the military. Once the SEALs got Bin Laden, I think that kind of sealed the deal as far as what branch I was going to go to. I was like, there's something going on there that these guys got the call to go in, and now years later, I understand there's like a lot more to it, but they were the ones that went and got them. So that was that was the only reason I decided to go to the Navy out of any of the other branches.
Got it. So the SEALs got Bin Laden, and the Navy got you because all right, fair enough. I get it. I get it. All right. So you went OCS post college, or what was your commissioning source from there?
Yeah, so I actually enlisted. So
Okay. All
I
right.
was in this like kind of like the late entry program. There's a guy up in Connecticut and Rhode Island called Captain Bissett. He's a former SEAL. And through that program, got to meet both enlisted operators and officers along the way. And they came in and were like, "Hey, if you want to get paid more, become an officer. If you want to go and do cool stuff, become an enlisted guy." So, that was kind of the branch of the road for me. Maybe at like a later time, I was thinking like, okay, I'll go. I have a college degree, maybe become an officer. But I just got kind of ingrained in the enlisted community while I was there, and ended up getting out as a E6.
Got it. And how did you know, or did you just take the ASFAB and figure out you wanted to be a Crippy, or how the MOS or any NEC designation piece, to become a SIGINT work out for you?
Yeah, so I mean,
Not a lot of people are aware of that MOS. I mean, it's kind of one of those things like you don't really go in a lot of times thinking I'm going to be a SIGINT guy. I mean, it's kind of an off the beaten path MOS a lot of times, I would say.
yeah, and I would say like right before I went in, or many years before I went in, my uncle was a intel officer in the Army. He was with the SOG teams in Vietnam. So he was in 65, 66, like kind of like right in the heart of the war, going out with those guys into places that we weren't supposed to be going to at that time, right? Laos, Cambodia, kind of doing surveillance, like special reconnaissance on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So like hearing those stories and kind of his perspective from like the intel mind of like, the conventional mindset versus intelligence, right? It's like, hey, these are the kind of things that we think about a little bit differently. Special operations, he was like back in the days of like Air America, like all the things that were going on at that time on kind of like the more like secretive side, right? And intelligence, um, cryptology. There's a bunch of cryptologists around that time, kind of like listening posts, right? So that always interested me, always fascinated me about the military. There's kind of like this other dimension that no one really talks about, right? You kind of see in movies, there's guns and shooting, and then there's like this kind of intelligence, kind of spooky James Bond like side of it that really there's no context out in the civilian world other than if you know someone that was in there. All that being said, I joined the military. I ended up going to Buds as like a SEAL candidate. I got to second phase. I made it through Hell Week. I got to second phase, and at that time, I got medically disqualified.
Oh,
Basically, I got exercise induced, like got diagnosed with exercise induced asthma. The Navy does not allow you to dive on the rebreather with asthma, so I had to re-rate. In that time, kind of like the struggle, I ended up going to become a deck seaman for a period of time,
oh,
and then but it gave me time to like, okay, this is not the way for me because of the circumstances that had arisen at the time, and I, eventually found out, hey, there's a cryptologist, a really cool thing that goes on. I kind of like talked to SEALs, and they're like, hey, there's this group of cryptologists. At one time I was kind of like, well, you can re-rate to SWIC, and I had spoke with like a SEAL Master Chief at the time. He's like, well, look at this, right, and then. I kind of got into that community, kind of got interested there, ended up talking with some guys that were the NSW cryptologists, what's called the TIO operators. And that is essentially like the SIGINTers for the SEAL teams. And, the rest is history. I cross-rated, became a CTR. I did my year deployment and kind of getting ahead of myself. But, year deployment to Bahrain, where I augmented the Eisenhower Strike Group right in 2016, right in the heart of the Mosul offensive. And then I went on kind of like a special collection mission also during that time with like the USS Ponce that ended up having like a pretty advanced collection suite by, an interagency partner.
it's always amazing, and the folks that I talk to on the show that um, everyone's journey is different, and it's every journey has a series of doors closing and other doors opening, and you have to have that sense of resiliency or grit or just ability to push through adversity to get to where you want to go. And it's never a straight line. I mean, I think people always have this idea of, like, you had this idea you were going to be a SEAL, right? You
Right.
great. I'm going to go through and I'm going to do it. And obviously wasn't the path you planned to be on. But you got there in an indirect way, right? And I have a feeling that the career path you took in transition has taken you on several indirect ways. But it's just interesting that that's how a lot of these stories, that when I talk to folks that are in this space, in the tech startup space in general, in the venture capital private equity space, that it's indirectly, you never it's rarely a straight line of getting there. It's always like, okay, I thought I was gonna do this, and like, nope, that didn't exactly work, but I pivoted here. But the common theme is also that I had these core competencies that the military taught me, that were instilled within me, that I didn't quit. I didn't just say, well, I guess it's all over. I guess I'm just gonna go back to mom's couch and pout about it, and I'm gonna say that it didn't work out. But you think, no, okay, that didn't work out, but I'm gonna find a way to make it. I'm gonna be successful in spite of the obstacle. I'm gonna figure out a way to get there, go around it, go over it, go through it, tunnel around it. But I'm still going to get there, just in a different, you know, path than I thought. And that to me is it's a trend, and I love it. But it's just interesting, and you seem to have that same path, at least in the Navy, and I assume in your future career as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I mean, the uncertainty that you deal with an entrepreneur, like, is the same kind of uncertainties that you see when you're in the military and you're kind of like career path, especially when you encounter something, right? It's like, you get your MOS and you're in that MOS for the rest of your career. I kind of had this like weird path where I had to, figure it out again, because I had this dream that I was going to do something, and I had it back in my head. Well, worst comes to worst, I also just made it through the toughest week of any military training that there is.
Right.
Right. And, it wasn't until after that I got medically disqualified in second phase because of something that's out of my control. I was born with this, asthma, exercise-induced asthma, essentially for a reason, right? And, it was just kind of like, okay, well, what's next, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what's the next step? How am I going to, work with the situation that I'm in and charge forward with what I want to do as like the next step in my life? What are my interests, right? And it's kind of like dialing it back for a second. What am I interested in? I've always been interested in this kind of like Intel area, actually, and specifically to your point, I had spent some time at AMU, American Military University. I went and did some Intel courses because it's something I'm interested in. And I went originally in with like the thesis that, human is like this big thing in the military. And then I come to find out, after kind of peeling the pieces back, because you got former Intel guys and special operations guys in these classes, that it's actually SIGINT that is the one that's leading out the charge in most of operations across the military. Like, the footprint of the National Security Agency is throughout all the different branches for a reason. So, that kind of lens and scope was what I was kind of pushing forward with. And once I met those guys in NSW doing some stuff that was like, this mix of tactical cool guy stuff that the SEALs do and Intel stuff, it was kind of like, that was my path forward from that moment on. I was like, I'm going to be that guy. And, that's what I am becoming. After my time in Bahrain, I became a TIO operator, right? So you go through the NSW TIO course, you screen, you get selected, you go through essentially like what the equivalent is of SQT, but for this, like for the SEAL teams, is their ULT, so unit level training cycle. So you have younger SEALs that have already gone through SQT, and you kind of got to keep up. You're kind of drinking through a fire hose. Not only you have to like learn all the SEAL team TTPs, CQC, land warfare, urban combat, OTBs, right? Shipboardings, all these different things that you did, and be really good at being a SIGINTer, because that's your main mission while you're on the team, right? It's like same with EOD as an enabler. Hey, I'm there to find the bad guy and protect the team from threats, right? Indications and warnings, find out where that bad guy is using signals intelligence. The EOD guys like keep everyone safe with the bombs, right? IEDs and HBIDs that come along like while you're out in operation. That's what we're there to do. So we have to be really good at your job and be really good at the tactics so that you're respected amongst your peers in the platoon.
Yeah,
So
no, it's definitely. I mean, it is a double. I mean, again, you have to be. It's a. I think it's hard in a lot of ways, right? The ante, just the cards to entry are being able to do the insert, right? To jump out of the plane, to make the assault onto the ship, to ride the rib, whatever it is. That's just to get there. That's the ride, right? Then you got to do your job. Then you have to be able to shoot the weapon. I mean, that's all part of the so it is. It's definitely an added layer of difficulty to have to add that technical skill on top of all the things you're doing as the insertion platform, which is so definitely shoot.
Yeah, I mean,
pretty significant. Yeah.
Yeah, and to the point, right? It's like, we're going through training, kind of like my first time in land warfare, and they're like, "Hey, you're never going to do an AK insert, right? No one ever does AK inserts." And I go to Iraq in 2019, my first op, AK insert, right? And I got all my like SIGINT gear on, right? My flyweight is probably the biggest of anyone on the platoon, right? I'm sitting at like 225 at the time. My flyweight's like 315, and you're going through the desert in Iraq, and it's 100 degrees, and you're doing AK insert into target. And just like you're saying, right? It's like that's what you're there to do, though, right? Like that's the job.
Yep.
So did that in 2019. Did like basically ISIS, like SIGINT directed raids out in Western Anbar. And then, at that time, basically, my first deployment, we kind of pushed ISIS out of Iraq and into Syria. And then at that point, they were coming out of Syria and back into Iraq and into the West there. So we were going out and doing cave clearances and just general like direct action raids with our partner force, CTS at the time. Left there, went to Yemen in 2021, and did a lot of the same. I was support 2 SEAL platoons and a foreign military unit that may or may not have been there, right, at the time. And, as the sole ground collector, and I think we talked about this before, actually, now SOCOM Actual, Admiral Bradley came down and coined me as I was kind of bouncing around that country and providing, ground collect as a sole collector down there at the time.
And did you just get fascinated with the tech when you were in? Like, was that like you're like a techy geek? Did you feel yourself kind of like, this is my jam? I'm like the tech geek guy, or obviously you've migrated into that space, or is it like this is my job, or is it something you really got? I mean, but you like reading the manuals and all in and knew all the, I'm just curious if that was something you kind of saw as something that you maybe felt would be a career later on in life, or is it something that was like, I don't know, I'm just curious if you were kind of already thinking that way during that time period.
Yeah, so like kind of like going back, like I was always diving a level deeper, even when I was like doing the fleet stuff, right, the special collection stuff. Like I was like always diving a level deeper, like fascinated, right, of like how this was working, like what were the systems that were enabling us to do this operation, right? At the edge compute is a new term in kind of like the civilian world. In the military, it's just called compute, right? It's like, what compute power do I have to go out and action and do my mission? So, I'm diving into like an app like ATAC, right? So ATAC is kind of like the situational awareness tool for the Army, the Marine Corps, Special Operations, kind of flip down, kind of understand what the environment was. I immediately latched onto that outside of my own training. So, we in NSW get put through essentially like your SIGINT training, your edge compute, like what you can do, and kind of like computer science stuff, writing some rudimentary scripts. But the end goal is always to find the bad guy, right? Like, so that's been my motivation all along, right? It's like kind of like going back to the Bin Laden thing. How do I find the bad guy, right? And I think that has kind of like pursued my interest into technology and kind of the ways in which we as a military go out and kind of use that and leverage that to our advantage. So that's always been right. It's like, for me, at least, I want to dive deeper in technology to make that a more efficient process.
Yeah.
And that's my motivation and has been for quite some time. Right?
And I mean, obviously you spent 6 years in the Navy then. I mean, you did some pretty cool stuff, but at some point did you decide like, all right, I've done all the cool stuff that I want to do. And like, what was the decision point for you to get out and to move into the civilian sector? Was there just was it like a light bulb moment, or was it was it a hard choice, or kind of what was your transition decision like?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a super hard choice. So I was in Yemen, and like I mentioned, in 2021. So I was right in the middle of the pullout, right? And I was kind of like at this, and I just screened to go to DevGru right before I went on that deployment, right? So so that was right at my like 9-year mark. I was been in the Navy for 9 years at that point.
Yep.
I'd done those 3 deployments. This was my 3rd deployment that I was actually going out on. And I screened, like I was hopping on the plane and I'm screening with some of the guys and stuff like that, like the day before, before I'm heading out as I need to go and execute this deployment, do turnover and everything. I end up getting the kind of like, selected to go. Orders are basically cut for 3 months after I get back home from deployment. And, I kind of just had to do some like self-reflection in that deployment, right? It's like, is this something I want to do for another 10 years, right? Because like, it's that decision point. I'm going to be at 10 and a half years or 10 years at that time. What does the next step look like for me? Like, how do I, want to define the rest of my life, kind of thing. And to that point, because I've been so busy, like I didn't have a chance to really settle down and start a family and, meet someone. It's like hard to meet someone in San Diego. And we're like, hey, it's, nice to meet you. I'm going to go away for 3 months.
Yeah.
I'll come back for 2 weeks and then I'm going to be gone for 7 months. Right. It's like
right.
Not necessarily like the best dating criteria. So yeah, so that like factored into it. I mean, I think like at the time, like the pullout kind of like was the cherry on top, like the kind of the way the pullout was handled didn't help me like want to stay in at that point. Kind of like the frustration, I think, as many veterans felt at that time, kind of like the way that, just even the image of that and kind of, us being signators, we have a little bit more context than that too. And like kind of like what the general sentiment was at that time in the intelligence community. So, between those things, I was like, I feel like as an enlisted guy, as an E6 at the time, right? It's like, I'm not really getting paid that much. This really hasn't been like, it's been great. I've done everything like I set out to do initially, like to your point, right? It's like I deployed, I did intel, I got a clearance, what's next for me? And I think with that, it was a hard choice because I really, 25-year-old Brian or 23-year-old Brian, when I joined the military, all I wanted to do was go to Denver,
right,
and just get a taste of what that was like.
Yep.
But at that time, it was like 33-year-old Brian was not 25-year-old Brian.
Right.
It was like, a different set of priorities kind of evolved at that time. And, I was like, okay, well, if that's what's making me, tip over one way or another, it's hard to say no to the thing that I dreamed about since I was a young man. But, there's a lot more to it than that for me at that stage. So, I ended up saying, I'm not re-enlisting and kind of going that route, and then kind of opened up this world of what was next, right? It's like, I've got to figure something out. So I kind of like I took the GMAT, I took the LSAT, right? And looked at like, asked around to a bunch of people, got involved in some of once I got back, right? The Honor Foundation was actually the one that I ended up going through as it's very closely related to NSW. They have that kind of like campus right there. So did that, kind of opened up my eyes to this world of like what's possible, what's next, what talents we can bring, because we're not good at that. And inherently, like as veterans, right, we're like your actions speak louder than your words. Where in the civilian sector, I think it's kind of like swapped around, right? And it's hard for us to kind of wrap our minds around like being humble, right? It's like, I'm very humble, it was like, I'm just going to show everyone what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
Where like the civilian sector, no one knows what you're capable of. No one knows what, doing direct action raids, like SIGINT killing capture missions in the desert, what that all entails and what goes into that. There's a lot that goes into it. And depending on how you structure your resume or the next job you want, really, the possibilities are endless. So, hopefully that helps kind of outline like my mentality as I was looking to get out at that time and what my decision criteria was. Happy to like dive deeper into any of that. But
yeah, I'd love to hear more. I mean, I understand that certainly, where where you sit, where you stand. Again, you're a different person when you're 33 than when you're 25, and you've done all the things you kind of check the boxes that you wanted to do when you were 18 or 22, and all the cool hula stuff you've done. And
Yeah.
it is. I mean, 10 years is that decision point of like, am I making the commitment to do 20, or am I kind of? That's really a big on the fence time. So I certainly get that. But I would be curious, and I've been a mentor for the Honor Foundation, and I know Matt Stevens and those guys. And I've had those guys on the show; they're awesome, and love what they do. I would be curious about what your transition process was like. I mean, certainly, the Honor Foundation is a great job. Their approach is, I think, I mean, not I say unique, but it is tailored, I think, a lot of times to the SF community, and does some good things for them to help them translate their skills to the civilian world. Did you feel like that worked for you? And how did it? I mean, how did you get from there to where you are? And what was again, was it a linear path to say, oh, I'm a techie guy, I'm going to get into defense tech? Or I mean, what was, how'd you figure all that out?
Yeah, no, it was definitely not a linear
Yeah, I
path.
figured not. So, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, no, so, as I got back home, I had to get a few surgeries actually, because I've been beat up over the years, right? I had to get surgery on my foot, on my nose from like a helmet hit me in the face, right? So I was like, a few things I had to get taken care of. And then in that time, kind of like in some of my recovery, was just, like the studying for these exams and kind of opening up doors as like, it was kind of like, I knew I didn't want to be in the military anymore. It was like, I didn't want to go to DevGru and basically be at the wake and call of a pager for most of the next 4 years, right? So I was like, okay, I know I don't want to do that, but now it's like, well, what do I want to do, right? It's like, I know I'm capable of a lot of things. I've been proven that not only to myself, but to other people, the Navy, right? So as I shifted, I looked at what's next, and that's the biggest question. That's why we're here, right? And I had no idea at the time. So the Honor Foundation kind of like, brings you in, get a little like the resumes, and one of the biggest like tenets that they have is like a cup of coffee. I think it's like 60 cups of coffee or 30 cups of coffee that they expect you to do over the course of the 3 months. And I just never stopped doing that. Right. It's like, and I still, never stopped doing it. If anyone ever hits me up, I take their call, and I'll always have a conversation or meet in person if we're local. But that just opens up your aperture to what the world of possible is. Right. And it's like, nothing's impossible, right? It's like you see, what is it? Dino Markakis, the CEO of Saronic, was a team guy, and then he goes and starts a defense tech company building boats. No real experience building boats, but now he's raised $1 billion and is going to build boats. I think those types of transition stories where you see someone kind of go and do something, maybe pivot and do like, he did private equity before. There's plenty of other people that just kind of make that jump, right? They figure it out, like kind of like I figured out. I was like, I need, like in the military, I want to do that job. What do I need to get there? Yep, right? There's a bunch of paperwork and people I need to talk to. But I think the more you can scope, like, how you see yourself in the future, whether that's making more money, whether that's moving to a certain place, whether that's, taking more time for family, right? Those are your kind of priorities that you're aligned against. And I think that comes with, for the first time for veterans, they have the choice to do what's right for them, right? Instead of like a PCS move or something. So you have all these variables that are aligning, and you almost like at the time I didn't know myself, right? As I'm moving on from the military, I didn't know myself that well. So that helped me kind of frame that, understand where, the opportunities lie in the future. And I ended up using the Honor Foundation and then hiring our heroes as my transition pathways. Like, kind of use the most of these programs as possible because they're there for a reason. So in hiring our heroes after the Honor Foundation, I, kind of similarly like went through their interview process and then got selected. And then they essentially take you to go and, figure out who you want to work for. I actually interviewed with Tesla. I interviewed with Disney. I interviewed with all these different companies and like way different experiences in each, right? I think it was like logistics for Tesla, and they were kind of like monitoring their logistical pathways because at the time I was getting out, they were still kind of dealing with, COVID and supply chain issues. And that was a big thing to know where their parts were. Disney was, I think, more of like on like the software development side and kind of like maybe even like some of their security protocols, like on the cybersecurity side. And then Booz Allen, it was with their commercial cybersecurity firm. So kind of like commercially facing. To me at the time, I was like, I don't really want anything to do with defense at the moment. I ended up going there, spending 3 months in Booz Allen's commercial cybersecurity practice, kind of bounced around again using that cups of coffee. Hey, talking with people within that organization, but then the larger enterprise of Booz Allen, right? In that internship, that skill bridge that I was doing. Um, the downside of hiring here is only 3 months, but that kind of makes you kind of get up and move around and try and see like, what you can do and how you can maneuver to get the most out of that 3 month period of time. I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't cut out for commercial cybersecurity. I missed the mission, right? It's like that was like one of the things that I noted almost immediately, right? It's like there's a lack of context. There's a lack of like kind of purpose there for me. That's how I felt. And found out about, at the time, Booz Allen's defense tech sector, which is called the Digital Battlespace Platform. And I got introduced to the executive vice president through the Hiring Heroes program. Ended up, talking to his senior vice president and then his program team, like software team for TAC, like how I mentioned earlier, TAC. My curiosity kind of landed me a job in this case where, they were like, oh, you've got experience in a tactical scenario using TAC. We want to, bring you on the team and see how you can fit in. And that's what I did for the next 2 years, right? As I transitioned, I went to Booz Allen. And, there's other portions. I'll pause there because that was a lot to jump on.
No, that was great. And again, I mean, I think it's networking, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I tell people, I talk to a lot of transitioning veterans every week. And the idea of 50 cups of coffee, there's a TED talk on it. It's about talking to people all the time. And your point is so well made. And I say this all the time to people. It's like, it's as much learning about what you don't want to do as it is what you do want to do, right? That is part of the process, to your point of, using Hiring Heroes or interviewing for a job and learning what Tesla has to offer and Disney has to offer, other companies have to offer. And like, okay, that sounds okay, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for right now. And kind of figuring out, okay, what do these companies do? Because a lot of times you don't really know. I mean, it's like, I mean, I remember my personal journey of transition, talking to friends of mine in different industries. In particular, I remember, buddies of mine were in commercial real estate. I'm like, all right, what do you sell buildings? But what do you do? What does it mean? I don't, explain what a day in the life of that is like. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not, okay. I don't think I want to do that. That's just not what I really want to do. Right. But to find what you do want to do. And I love how you networked internally at Booz Allen to get to the place where you were the right fit, which then put you on, again, the right path to get to be. You probably started in the wrong place, but you found the way to get to the right place that led on to where you are today, right? So again, you hear it a million times, but your network is your net worth, right? You're constantly networking, and that is what leads you to get to where your next opportunity is. You're constantly networking, not knowing, not maybe even intentionally with an intent all the time of having a direct path to get somewhere, but when you need to leverage your network, you have it there. When the opportunity is needed, you're able to leverage it for the purpose you need it for. So pretty cool.
Right.
You were able to do that and use your experience from the Navy. Then came in handy because you say, oh yeah, actually my tactical experience doing these things is exactly what you need. And you didn't know that going into it, but you found the way to leverage those things and be a useful asset to them. I assume on day one, they probably were like, holy crap, this is great. You have all this stuff. We didn't even know, they probably didn't even know you had that or you wanted that. So pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think like that's part of the process too, right? Is like initially kind of left the Honor Foundation, was like, man, and I mentioned GMAT, LSAT, not knowing which one, right? And then part of that is like scoping what that is. And I think that's when I ran into Brendan initially, right? When he was leading out the MilVet and the military veteran. And, he was like, he had come from Wharton. He was kind of like in the middle of like, running his business and doing the MilVet. And he was like, talk to some lawyers, talk to some people that, are there, get their perspective, like both like ones that like being a lawyer and ones that don't like being a
Yeah.
lawyer, everything in between. Right. So I talked to lawyers that like their jobs. And then I was like, kind of like, caveated with, I'm trying to make a decision between business school and law school. And most lawyers tell you go to business school.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, that was like my experience, at least. And then some were actually going to business school, even in my business school class at Georgetown, I think there was 3 lawyers in my business school class. So, pretty interesting to see that, kind of like them kind of understanding like the world is mostly revolves around business, even in law. Right. So I think, that 50 cups of coffee is essential to knowing what you want, what's next, helping people kind of like shape that for you. Because I think I even went at one point, I was like, I'm going to be a U.S. Marshal, and U.S. Marshals use a lot of the same technologies that we use, but for manhunt stuff, for like fugitives. So I was like, I'm going to do that, and then I slowly learned like those guys were almost even pushing me away from that. Right? It's like, you've already done a lot of this cool stuff, and then the lawyers were kind of like, oh, like go to business school. So it kind of shaped my experience by these conversations that I had throughout the time, even after the Honor Foundation, to really key in on, okay, I'm going to go to business school. I'm going to go to business school in Georgetown because I'm interested in defense tech, right? Yeah. It's like from working at Booz Allen, even for a short period of time, where am I going to have the biggest impact, right? Is Washington, D.C., Booz Allen's headquartered Washington, D.C. So that kind of was like part of it. The team I was working for is headquartered out here. And Georgetown, what better place that's kind of like the seat in DC, like one of the better schools in the area. And there's many of them, right, in Washington, DC. A little bit more unconventional than what, like, a lot of people do, like where it's like Wharton, Harvard, MIT. But that really just spoke to me. I grew up Catholic, the Jesuit values, kind of like care of the whole person was something that kind of spoke to me as well. Do right by others. They should do right by you. Care for others, right? It's like all those things align with like that kind of like mission statement of Georgetown, very much aligned with who I am and who I want to surround myself with. So I think like, the academic level, once you decide, if you do want to go to business school, what is the right place for you to end up, not only as a academic institution, but also as their mission statement, their values, their network obviously is huge, and the Georgetown network just happens to be like all over government, right?
Yeah.
So it's
No,
most agile. Yeah.
I love it. As an aside, my wife and I got married at Holy Trinity Church right there on Georgetown's campus, and I was a Jesuit high school product, so proud man for others. So I could definitely can align with those values. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, when did you make the call to go off on your own and kind of make the real jump into the founder space? How that journey or how those conversations come up? I'd be curious. That's really, a lot of the folks that are listen to these podcasts are interested in that space in particular and defense tech. So how that path or conversation start, or what was the idea or impetus for that? Was there one single thing, or was it just kind of a coalescing of different things? Obviously, you've been in the space for a long time. You obviously chose DC. You were working in that space at Booz. So I mean, you were surrounded by that world. So I assume it was kind of you're bombarded by it. But was there like was there a lightning bolt moment, or was it a kind of just a it's all around? You tried to piece it all together by like a puzzle or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was like I saw a path, right? It's like my intuition was telling me, like, I was in San Diego at the time. Like when I was getting out of the military, I got out of the military in San Diego. Wanted to get back home to the East Coast was part of it. Be closer to family. Family's all still in New York. And the defense tech side, like my intuition was telling me, like, okay, DC makes sense, right? Booz Allen's here. They kind of like be working with the team, get hands on. I'm a hands on guy. I like to be there, see the impact. That evolution kind of occurred, right? Booz Allen's a great organization. They were kind of building out their defense tech portfolios. They see this kind of like defense tech wave coming so that they could be there in a business sense to capture some of that market. And really just get an idea of like, I know the tactical space really well. I know coming out knew nothing about how the business of defense works, right? It's like there's, all of the things that we use in the military come from private organizations or public, from the commercial sector. The government makes very little products on its own, right? So once you kind of wrap your head around that, all the contracting process in place, how contracting works, how business development works, right? You start painting a picture how product management, how project management, all these different roles kind of play in together to form an organization. Coming out, I knew none of that, right? I didn't really, I was like, I care about this job because I didn't really have a choice. That was my life. And, just scoping that, framing that, how this all fits in the mission, right, is where I was trying to see, right, is like kind of like understanding, figuring that out, going to the school, kind of understand the business concepts, the overarching business concepts, right, vertical integration, EBITDA, like all these kind of like terms that you hear even in passing in the Booz Allen world. Now you have some context of what that means, right? So you start putting those pieces together, understanding like, okay, do I want to stay in a large organization? What are some of the issues here? Like, why aren't they solving those problems, right? Some of them acute problems. And, that could be argued one way or another, right? It's like, I think like a lot of veterans share that sentiment of like, why do I see all this modern technology out in the civilian world? And I go out to war and I've got, still got an M4, right? It's like, and maybe I have an ATAC device, but a lot of times that device is an S6, which came out in like 2009 or something, right? And that's still kind of in the repertoire of our arsenal. So there's like some of those, like, that dichotomy between the two worlds that you see in marketing and Androlls and defense tech. And then, the reality of how we lived. And my reality was very fresh at that time, 2021, coming out and going working at 2022. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So, through that understanding, like why large organizations maneuver the way they do, right? M&A is a thing because it's hard to innovate as a large organization. It's hard to really vertically integrate and come up with a solution from customer need to product, right? And then merge those together to create value. So all of that kind of learned through the process of working at Booz Allen, going to get my MBA, my executive MBA from Georgetown. And, in that process, kind of like there's a few entrepreneurs in my class, kind of like talking and like, hey, this is how I see the world. And I was kind of interested in VC. Joe Musselman, who's like, he's Honor Foundation, kind of like one of the founders of Honor Foundation. He was kind of in VC and help me look behind the curtain a little bit there. And I hosted a few different events because it's something I was interested in. There's meeting people, right? Again, going back to networking. I'd hosted an event with the senior VP of my business unit at Booz Allen, Joel Dillon. Joe Musselman came. I think I had another VC for Marlin Spike and one of my mentors, Dave Peterson, Marine Sigener as well. Ended up going to work for Three Letter Agency. So he, that kind of helped, get in these networks, surrounding yourself with the people that and the things you're interested in. All kind of led me to the path of like entrepreneurship. Dave's an entrepreneur. People in my EMBA class were looking to be entrepreneurs. There's programs in the Georgetown community that are set up for entrepreneurs, right? Like Georgetown Ventures, right? The Georgetown Venture Lab that I'm sitting in today, right? It's like these are things that kind of help spur that community and enable entrepreneurs to be where they are. Right? The idea just came from my frustration in the military itself, right? It's like I see these commercial technologies being used, kind of like whether that's at Booz Allen or other organizations that are kind of like doing demos at AUSA or whatever. And, I'm rocking a man pack that kind of does the job, but not really. And that was like kind of a frustrating portion. And that at that time, right, 2019, 2021, I'm fusing together. I'm building my own products downrange, right? And like building out my vehicle pack. I'm like, outfitting size, weight, power, dealing with what compute, what box that I need to take out to execute the mission. I have 5 different boxes, right, to do this. So all of that kind of understanding the user story very well, like the software development term, right, user story, that helped me kind of like, okay, where's the breakdowns? Where's the problems? Why is this not being solved? And that just comes from like some of these like, big barriers to entry in the defense market. and just like the way organizations as like a strategic entity operate, right, kind of doesn't allow that like very quick decision making to get built into a product, right? It's like upsides and downsides of being a startup founder is like you don't have as much money and as much I guess stability, right? Which I've been used to before, as we talked about, and you have to rely a lot on your vision and what you're going to do every day. So
Just strapping to make it happen. I get obviously,
yeah,
but you've been able to do it. I mean, well, I guess that kind of brings us really to where you are today, or how you've been able to get where you are today, and maybe talk about what's going on with Darkstar and how it's going, and I mean, how, ups and downs, things you've learned, what
yeah,
you would do differently, maybe. I mean, kind of where are you at, or anything. I mean, what can you talk about? Successes, failures, lessons learned. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, every day's a journey, that's for sure, right? It's like, um, mostly like the bootstrapping. I've got angels, like mostly because of the network that I've worked in, right? So I got like a few angel investors and Darksaber kind of working to like build like our seed round out as we're going to look and raise some money to accelerate growth, right? There's a reason I think people are investing in defense tech, and that's maybe like a changing environment across the world, right? It's like you have Israel and Gaza, and the Middle East is like, showing no signs of cooling down. Obviously, Russia, Ukraine, Indo-PACOM is like an unknown. We're hoping that, China doesn't move on Taiwan, but, some of the indicators are there that the world is not becoming a safer place. And we're potentially on a limited timeline to get warfighters like modern technology, right? It's like generally there's a saying where you're going to war with the arsenal of your last war, right? It's like you're kind of going to war with what you got. And we're not necessarily positioned for that next conflict, right? It's worrying because I have friends, obviously, that are still in the military. I have family. My brother's Green Beret that's military, Marine Corps, Navy, like cousins, right? And I want to make sure that they're safe. And they, as a nation, I want to make sure that they've got the ability to stay alive, survive, and react to their environment. That's what Darksaber's like core mission tenet is, like increased survivability and lethality for combat operation forces. And like from GWAT and going back like through time, right? It's like Enigma code and Purple code, like going all the way back to World War II, and how pivotal those were for us to win those wars. Because like if you remember, like at the early onset, like our planes weren't great. Our tanks, like throughout the war, weren't better than like the German tanks. The Germans had jet engines before we did, but we had the best information, right? It's like we knew what they were going to do before they knew what they were going to do in many cases. So I think that all kind of like leads me to this thesis. This is very important, right? And how do we push these capabilities out further to the edge, right? In a near peer fight to keep warfighters safe. And that's really the way I'm looking at the problem. And what we're doing now is just trying to accelerate that growth and get it into warfighters' hands, right? JSOC, SOCOM, intelligence community partners that we're working with primarily as our beachhead, right? And because I think like most of those guys are kind of like highly trained, highly experienced, and then kind of train using AI ML algorithms to get that out and propagate this capability to the rest of the larger force. So that's kind of the thesis of Darksaber. There's many dual use or commercial use cases, but my primary focus today is making sure these are delivered to warfighters.
And when you think of the word defense tech, I mean, it's a very broad word. I mean, is it like, should you think drone, or should you think anything? I mean, but what does it mean to you? I guess in this space, from a Darksaber perspective, what does defense tech? What does that mean as far as integrating AI ML into defense tech?
Yeah, so I mean, I would characterize Darksaber as more of like an information dominance company, and then we're integrating the most advanced commercial models to make that job more effective, right? And I think this comes to a point or brings me to a point about MIT recently released a study that 95% of enterprise AI has not been successful, right, or failed, right? And if you don't have the context for the mission, or if you don't have the context for the business, and you just try and sprinkle AI on something, it will inevitably kind of unwind and fail,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have to have like deep subject matter expertise, whether that's SIGINT, EW, defense tech, right? If you're doing it for supply chain, right, you have to know the industry to be able to
Yeah,
uh, implement it correctly.
sure.
So I think like the defense tech as a phrase is used synonymously across pretty much any defense today whatsoever. Whether that's like AI dashboards or drone boats, right? The ones Saronic or Havoc are building. Um, just as like kind of like a movement overall, kind of like these like people characterize it in different ways, whether it's an American Diamondism or the kind of like new renaissance of American innovation. People call this up and coming group of like neo primes, like neoliberal primes. So neoliberal period after kind of like the World War II era. Everyone calls it something different, but I think a lot of times for me and my frustration again, like kind of like the larger community is lack of context, right? How does this land into how we fight wars as the United States? You can't necessarily pull requirements directly from Ukraine and integrate them into the U.S. military,
Hmm.
right? There's not a one for one there. Ukraine before this happened, right? It's a third world military. We were pretty integrated. We have the F-35. Ukraine just got an F-16, right? There's like a little bit of a difference between the
Yep.
two. We're the only country in the world with B-2 bombers, right? These are just like matter of fact things. But when you take that, if you don't take the context of those two things and integrate them together, I think that's where we kind of get in trouble. And I think that veterans, point being that veterans are well positioned to help implement this because it's not an easy problem. AI, ML implementation, business development, right? Getting the military to see the need for it, right, is a job in and of itself. Sales, BD, that's a huge task that people kind of think when they're building a product, they don't really think about, right? It's like, oh, everyone's going to buy my product.
Yeah.
Not if no one knows who you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into it. As a founder, you're doing everything. You're doing marketing, you're doing HR, you're doing product, right? It's like across business like finance, right? You're doing everything. So that's why I say like every day's a journey, right?
And that's what I would ask. What would you, for people that want to get into this space, what are lessons learned, things you would if you had to start over the journey over again, what would you do differently? Just if this is a place you want to get into, what is a path that, I mean, not that it's ever easy, but what can maybe some things that can help you to be more successful if you do want to get into the defense tech startup-y kind of space?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, keeping an ear to the ground, I've seen people do this in different ways, right? It's like they're either like, there's even people that I've met that are still in the military that then are like kind of like hosting and kind of getting on LinkedIn and talking about like what the news is and just kind of starting conversation. So just going back to like, if you're interested in defense tech, start networking, right? And then, you almost rely on the people that you network with to kind of hone you in to what it is that like the people that you should be talking to.
Yeah.
It's like, is it the venture capital side, right? You should be talking to like venture capitalists that are have a defense tech thesis, right? Is it SIGINT EW companies, right? It's like, there's a few SIGINT EW companies that like either primes, right? It's like, is that kind of the way you want to go? Like a larger company, work for them, kind of work your way up the corporate ladder? Or do you want to just get into like a defense tech startup at any rate, right? Is that autonomy? Is it, but people have to know who you are. And I would say the way to best stand out in that is to be at some of these events in person, right? It's like when someone, meets you in person, you shake their hand, you have a beer, you have a coffee, whatever it is. I think that leaves a lot different impression than just, getting on the call, right? And that kind of goes to that location thing, right? San Francisco is great for venture capital. DC is great for defense and government. You name the different places, right? It's like, I think Austin's a good place also for defense tech, right? They have Army Futures Command, AFWorks all down there. So just like considering those things, right? It's like, what does the next step look like for you? Do you want to be in DC? Like, do you want to be going to the events that are here, the station DC, kind of like as an extension of the Capitol factory that originated in Texas, is now here in DC. And I think there's no substitute for, going to Capitol Hill and meeting with a congressman who sits on the Armed Services Committee, right? Like those types of connections. That's what people are, if you're looking at business development or just context, they want you to be ingrained. They want sometimes you're selling your network many times, right?
Yeah.
Like who do you go to in this situation, right? It's like, how do you get a phone call away from, getting language put into the next NDAA, right? It's like, these are the things that you start building and understanding the nuances to defense tech. And I think that, you look at a lot of the founders that come out and were veterans, there's a few, they know people in VC, right? They know people in the defense community. They've made relationships, made connections, because there's so many different facets to this game, right? And it's like a tough game, right? Like each has a little industry all along itself, right? Even like Saber, you look at like Saber advisors, right? Those guys have kind of like built a company around the Saber process, right? It's like getting small companies, transitioning technology, helping companies go from phase 1 to phase 3, IDIQ. That's just one facet of this whole thing, helping them transition from end user to contracting officer to, general officer to getting language in NDAA, lobbying, all these factors that come into play. And there's an industry, there's obviously many industries along the way for that, right? Whether you're being a strategic advisor or you want to get into lobbying, right? Like there's a whole industry within industry within industry many times around defense. And right, just really depends on where you want to be, what you want to do. But the key takeaway, again, network, right? It's like you're only going to find out more by talking with people. There's only so much that you can glean from podcasts or information online. So that's my big takeaway. If you want to get into,
I think that's some great advice, and it's certainly I hammer the networking mantra all the time. I think interesting to hear. We hear a lot of folks talk about the challenge of fundraising and needing to be in the VC side of the house. I don't as often hear, because I think a lot of times we're talking about folks that are more on the industry side, a more blue collar industry, and not in defense tech. But in defense tech, I think is interesting the connection with Capitol Hill and funding and the relationship that there is on the government contracting side, which is different than more of a civilian application, like a governmental application, and the connection there, which is a little bit more complicated sometimes, because if it is a governmental piece of it, there is going to be the potential that you're going to need to have some congressional language in there, and that whole other dynamic, which is a whole other industry, which makes it more complex and can be more risk, could be more, I guess, probably so in some ways less risky if it gets in there, but also more risky because it can always get stopped too, I guess, So there's some of that. So just interesting. So that's
and you can kind of gauge some of that too along the way, right? You can
yep.
You can gauge like, hey, you go sit down with someone at Capitol Hill and you see if your funding line is going up or going down.
Yeah.
If it's going down, that's not a good thing, right?
Right.
But if it's going up by 20, 30,000%,
yeah,
something's going well,
that's
right?
Really good. That's good. Yeah, good sign. Read the please. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of like you want to be that connected to almost, especially as a founder, you want to know each part of this pipeline.
Definitely.
And people at each part of this pipeline. So that's, kind of part of, the daily struggle.
Game, but part of the learning process to understand all the segments of the market.
Right.
It is a complex ecosystem to learn, more so than this purely civilian market. There's a lot more factors, I think, involved in it, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. 1,000%. And, I'll say it's like, there's a bunch of different takes on this, right? Dual use, right? Are you a dual use company?
Yeah.
People generally tell a tale of Palantir, or they'll say Anduril in the same breath, or SpaceX, right? And the truth behind that is that none of those companies started out as dual use. They started out purely focused on establishing a beachhead and a footprint within the defense market or the public sector market.
Yeah.
And then branched out later on to dual use. So, there's that narrative that goes around like, you have to be dual use from the start. I think that actually ends up hurting companies from my perspective, right? Because you're now a small company made up of, a few, maybe 10, maybe 20 employees. And now you've got to go into two different markets.
Spreading too thin. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And focus is not on one or the other.
Laser focused on one thing.
And that's what in the industry, right? Overall, establishing a beachhead, and that's like something very military, right? It's like, establish the beachhead and push out from there.
Yep.
And if you don't have, and I saw someone recently, I think it was on, maybe like Context VC, right? Associated with the military veteran.
Yeah.
And Tim there talking through like, people are just like very like, oh, I'm just going to build something for everyone. That's not a great strategy, right?
No.
It's like, I think that comes with it, right? You've seen like Palantir grow that way. You've seen SpaceX grow that way, but that's not how they started, right? That's not a narrative that makes a lot of sense. You have to have, and that's again, some of the intricacies of business development, like finding your friend on the other side to help you grow this business and fill a need that is crucial for them. Yep. So yeah, that's how I view kind of like the defense sector, and people argue that, right? It's like how do you drive down risk for investors? You go to the other market, but generally then your dollars aren't going as far. So yeah.
That's some great insights, Brian. I really appreciate chatting with you today. I learned a ton. Really fun. I wish you the best in this. I know it is complex, and but it's been great to hear your journey, your story from getting in the Navy and having that tech background to where you are now, and excited for the future holds. I will. Any last thoughts, comments before we wrap things up today? It's been a great run and great insights, but anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, generally, right, it's like, gotta know that you are valuable from the very beginning as a veteran, right? It's like you do have value because you're a deep subject matter expert, likely in some aspect, right? Whether logistics or warfighting, there's a need for you somewhere out there today, right? And kind of know your value. Get out there. The more people you know, the more opportunities you get. So, and the more you will understand your value as you move forward, right? So, again, like so often, and we've kind of nailed this point, hit this point home really hard today, is like, you got to meet people. You got to increase your network. That increases your opportunities. That increases the doors that open to you. So I think understand your value, and the world is your oyster in many ways, right? It's like go out and crush it. So thanks a lot, Beau. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time. This has been great.
Awesome, Brian. We'll keep crushing it. Can't wait to see what the future holds. Hope our path is crossed soon in the future, man. Good luck to you out here.
Good. You too. Bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. For more content, follow us on Instagram @TheMilitaryVet or on LinkedIn. Join us at an upcoming event or learn more on our website, themilvet.org. Feel free to email us directly at leadership@themilvet.org. Thank you so much and take care.